Hi, I'm Stephanie Jaworski of joybaking.com. Today we're going to make a chocolate yogurt pound cake, and this is what it looks like. Freshly baked, the outside crust will be nice and crisp, yet inside it is wonderfully soft and moist, has a delicious chocolate flavor, and that comes from both unsweetened cocoa powder, and we're going to add some chocolate chips. So the first thing that you will need to do is preheat your oven to 350 degrees Fahrenheit, which is 180 degrees Celsius. And then you will need a loaf pan. Mine measures 8.5 by 4.5 by 3 inches deep, which is 21.5 by 11.5 by 7.5 centimeters. Now you can just lightly spray the inside of your pan with a nonstick spray. You could lightly oil it, or today what I'm going to do is butter it. So I just melt a little bit of butter, and then I take my pastry brush, and we just want to brush the bottom and the sides of our pan. Make sure you get in those corners. We do not want our cake to stick. Okay. And then what I like to do to make doubly sure it doesn't stick to the bottom of the pan is just take a little piece of parchment, put that down there. Now you could just flip the paper over, because I like to have lightly butter the top of the parchment so it doesn't stick to the bottom of the cake too much. So I'm just going to take my brush and do that. Okay, so that is our pan. Really, yogurt cakes are so easy. They're dump and stir. You don't need a mixer. We have a bowl for the dry, a bowl for the wet. Mix them together and we are done. So I'm going to start with our dry ingredients. In a large bowl, I have 1 cup, which is 130 grams of all-purpose flour or plain flour. And then I'm going to add a 1/2 cup, 50 grams of unsweetened cocoa powder. Now I'm using, my preference is the Dutch process. That's what I like, but you can also use just the natural unsweetened, whichever one you like or have in the house. And then you will need 1 teaspoon, 4 grams of baking powder, 1/2 teaspoon, 2 grams of baking soda, and just 1/4 teaspoon, 1 gram. I'm using a fine kosher salt. You could just use a table salt. And I am adding 1 teaspoon, 2 grams of, you can use either an instant coffee powder or an instant espresso powder. It gives just a hint of coffee flavor. And I always find, coffee and chocolate go really nice together. So I think the coffee just highlights that chocolate flavor. But you know what? Some people don't like coffee, or they just don't want to have anything to do with it. So you can just leave it out. Or conversely, if you want a little more chocolate flavor or coffee flavor, you could up that to even 2 teaspoons of coffee powder. So I'm just using a whisk. You could just use a fork to mix everything together. Simple enough. And then, like I said, I like to, you have the unsweetened cocoa powder, which gives a wonderful flavor to our cake. But, to kind of make a more complex chocolate flavor, I'm adding 1 cup, which is about 175 grams of chocolate chips. Now, I'm using a bittersweet. Bittersweet is about 70% up. You could use a semi-sweet, you could use a milk, you could use white chocolate chips, or you could even use a combo of those. But I like the more, I guess you'd say, bitter chocolate chips. And if you don't want to add the chocolate chips, you don't have to. You can simply leave them out, or you could add some chopped nuts, some dried fruit, I think dried cherries, cranberries would be really nice. So just mix that in. That's it for our dry. Pretty easy. I know some people are going to ask, yes, if you want to pull out your mixer, you could, but it's up to you. So now, for the wet ingredients, in another bowl I have 3 large eggs. Have your eggs at room temperature, and 3 large eggs out of the shell is about 150 grams if you want to weigh your eggs. And I'm just using my whisk to break up the eggs. And then, of course, it's a yogurt cake. We need yogurt. So I am going to add 1 cup, which is 240 milliliters, 240 grams of, I'm using like a full fat or a whole milk plain yogurt. I'm actually using the Greek style. There's like, at least in the States, there's 2 types, just regular plain, and then we have what's called a Greek style, which tends to be a little thicker. And I don't know, I just prefer the flavor, but you know, either one. If you don't have in the house like a whole milk, full fat, you could use a reduced fat, but I would drain it because it's going to have a lot more water in it, so drain it first. Let's put that right in there. And you know, the yogurt, you know, it has that rich, kind of tangy flavor, which goes, kind of contrasts with the chocolate. But it also will give our cake a wonderfully moist texture. I just, you know, started doing yogurt cakes a few years ago, and you know, I'm kind of obsessed with them. So if you go to the joybaking.com, either our website or a YouTube channel, you will find lots of yogurt cakes to try out. If you do this one and go, boy, I like yogurt in my cakes, go and try some of the other ones. So just whisk that in. Now, I'm going to say I called it a pound cake. Technically, don't tell anyone, technically it's not a pound cake because pound cake means you have to have butter, and I'm using oil. But, you know, I find the look, the texture, the taste, it's kind of like a pound cake, so I took some liberty and called it a pound cake. You will need 1/2 cup, which is 120 milliliters, 120 grams of a flavorless oil. You could use a vegetable, a corn, canola, safflower, or even a very light tasting olive oil. And some people will say, yeah, but I want to use butter. Yes, you could use butter. 1/2 cup melted butter. But again, oil makes cakes wonderfully moist and really nice texture. And the other thing is, I like to store this cake in the refrigerator because it's got the yogurt in it. And typically, like a butter cake, if you put it into the refrigerator, it's going to get really hard. That butter, you know, butter gets hard when it's refrigerated. But with oil, it doesn't. So the cake, even when it's refrigerated, I can take it out, cut it, and it's still, I mean, it's not really soft, but it's pretty soft. I can eat it right from the fridge. So that's another added bonus of oil. And, you know, let's face it, nowadays it's cheaper than butter. Butter's pretty expensive now. I'm going to flavor this with 1 teaspoon, 4 grams of pure vanilla extract. And then, of course, we need some sugar. I'm using 3/4 cup plus 2 tablespoons, which is 180 grams of granulated white sugar. Now mine is organic cane sugar, so it's not like white, but same thing. So just whisk that in. And that's it for our wet ingredients and the sugar. So now, let's switch around here. I'm just going to pour the wet into the dry. We'll stir and done. You can have this cake made and in the oven in just no time. It's a great, during the week if you want something to serve after supper, perfect. Or have something with your tea or coffee. So you can use your whisk or your spatula to just mix them together. I'll start with my whisk and then I'll end with my spatula. Chocolate chips get a little caught in my whisk. Get those out. Okay. So now, I don't feel this cake needs a frosting. I mean, I just think it's just perfect. I mean, you could, whatever type of frosting, a white frosting, chocolate frosting if you want, but I'm more than happy with it, just the way it is. So you want to make sure all that flour is moistened, which it is. So dump that in. Oh, smell that chocolate. I love chocolate. And, you know, just keep in mind with cocoa powder, unsweetened cocoa powder, the brand, the type, whether you're using natural unsweetened or the Dutch process, will affect, you know, sometimes the color of your cake and the taste, because, you know, every brand has a different flavor. So find one you like. Okay, so now I'm just going to give it make sure it's no air bubbles and just smooth it out. For baking, you know, everyone's oven is a little different, so baking time can vary. But what you're, you know, there's time, but also what you're looking for, the cake will rise. If you touch like the center, it will be firm to the touch. There will be cracking on the surface. Don't panic, that's normal. You will see it starting, just barely starting to pull away from the sides of the pan. And of course, the toothpick test, insert it into the center, will come out clean. I do rotate my pan front to back about halfway through. So I'm going to say between 45 and maybe 50, 52 minutes in that time frame. You might want to check it like a few minutes before the 45 because maybe your oven's running a little hot, you know, just to make it, we don't want to overbake it because then it gets dry. So I'm going to say like 45 to 50, 52 minutes. So our cake is done. So put it on a wire rack. Oh, it just smells so wonderful in here. So if I touch the top, it's firm to the touch. I did put a toothpick into the center, came out clean, and just start to see it pull away from the sides. So it's done. I'm going to let it sit like this about 10-15 minutes, and then when we come back, I will take it out of the pan. So I let it cool about 10-15 minutes, so we'll take it out of the pan. So I've got an offset spatula. You just use a knife. Just run it along the sides just to make sure it's not sticking. And I'll just flip it. Pan's still a little warm. And see, buttering the top of that parchment didn't stick, just the way I like it. And then I'm just going to flip it back like that. There we go. Now, you want to let it cool down to room temperature before cutting. But really, I find this cake, while you can eat it the first day, and if you do slice it, I would probably use a serrated knife because the crust does get a little crisp once it cools down. But the way I like to do it is cover, like let it cool down to room temperature, then wrap it in plastic wrap or put it in a container and put it into the refrigerator at least overnight. I think this chocolate cake really benefits for at least a day before cutting it, because I find that both the texture, it softens, and the chocolate flavor, you know, a lot of times with a lot of chocolate things, the first day if you eat it, the chocolate's quite sharp. But after a day of storing it, it kind of softens, mellows the chocolate flavor, and it really, I can taste it more, the real true flavor of the chocolate. So that's what I do. And this cake can be stored in the refrigerator. I've stored it like up to a week. So that's about as long as it lasted. have a piece every day. And also, what you can do is freeze it for about a month. And when I freeze something like this, what I do is I put it into slices, and then I take a piece of either parchment paper, like a small square, or even wax paper, and put it between each slice. So then if you wanted, like you were home by yourself and you just wanted one slice, you just take one off from the freezer and then leave the rest of the cake in there. So therefore, I am not going to cut this one. This one I made yesterday, so I stored it overnight. Now I've had it out, so it's back to room temperature. If you took it out of the fridge and sliced it and ate it cold, which I actually like that, your chocolate chips will be nice hard, so you have a little bit of a crunch from the chocolate chips, which I like. But these ones are going to be soft because sitting at room temperature. Oh, that is, I love this cake. It's really good. The chocolate flavor is really delicious. And when you put chocolate chips along with the unsweetened cocoa powder, you get a more complex chocolate flavor because you get different types of chocolate, different flavors of that. And then it is wonderfully soft and moist. I mean, it's just, I'll take another bite just to make sure. Oh, you got the yogurt and then the oil. It really makes a wonderfully moist cake. I don't think it needs a frosting. I mean, you could, but it is rich enough. It is flavorful enough. It doesn't need anything. So, like I said, you can cover and store it 5 to 7 days in the fridge. You can freeze it, but you must make it. And until next time, I'm Stephanie Jaworski of joybaking.com.